Good afternoon again from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore. My name is Miguel Pangalaman from the ASEF Education Department. Welcome to the 5th session of the ARC8 conference, which will focus on Chapter 3 of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030. This chapter tackles inclusive international mobility of people and knowledge. I'm pleased to introduce our moderators for this session, Dr. Hilligje van 't Land, Secretary General of the International Association of Universities, also known as IAU, and Mr. Giorgio Marinoni, Manager of the Higher Education and Internationalization at the International Association of Universities, also from IAU. Before I hand over the floor to our moderators, allow me to share with you some details on the session flow. The first part of the session is public. During the 5-minute health break, at the end of the public session, everyone is invited to go to the next session. For the ASEM policymakers, we invite you to continue the discussion with moderators and experts in an in-depth policy dialogue that is closed door. That's it for me. Enjoy your interactions, and I'll see you at the end of this public session. I now give the floor to you, Hilligje and Giorgio.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for this very nice introduction. We're very honored and pleased to be here with two excellent speakers to kickstart a very important conversation on a chapter 3 of this impressive report. And chapter 3 focuses specifically on inclusive international mobility of people, and more importantly so, if I may say, of knowledge. And so this is a chapter about connectivity. It's a chapter about better understanding. It's a chapter of building better bridges between societies across the world. And this is also very close to the very core vision and mission of the International Association of Universities, which I have the honor to lead. The IAU is based in Paris, was created to do exactly that, to foster better cooperation around the world. And internationalization is a very important part of that. Giorgio Marinoni, who sits in the room with me on this part and will also take the floor, especially also in the part to discuss the report that will be presented to us, and in particular chapter 3. He's the manager internationalization. And so many of the outcomes in the report and the recommendations we've looked at very critically, and we really applaud to the many recommendations made both to policymakers and to the higher education sector in terms of institutions, but also staff and students. And so we hope that we will be able to welcome a very lively discussion towards the end. The list of those registered for the session was very impressive, from both Asia and Europe, and we hope that that will be reflected in a discussion in a few minutes. So I'm very pleased to give the floor to two eminent researchers who have engaged in the drafting of this important chapter for the report. Mr. Darren McDermott and Ms. Ginisha DEWANI. Darren McDermott is the team leader of the EU support to higher education in the Asian region, better known maybe under the acronym of SHARE, S-H-A-R-E. And Ginisha DEWANI is the Deputy Head Programs and Projects and Events Coordinator Asia for the International Association of Political Science Students, also known as IAPSS. And they both are members of the ARC8 expert group working on this impressive work, which led to the drafting of this chapter 3, inclusive international mobility of people and knowledge. And I think you don't want to hear more from me, but rather from them. And with Giorgio, we're pleased to give you the floor and look forward to a very fruitful discussion. So the floor is yours.
Many thanks for your very kind introduction, Hilligje, and thank you to everyone for joining us for this session. presenting Chapter 3 of the Outlook Report 2030, which, as Hilligje said, concerns international mobility of people and, yes, perhaps more importantly, knowledge. I'd like to thank the excellent Asia-Europe Foundation education team, first of all, for inviting me to participate in this wider group compiling the report, and also for their unwavering support throughout the process leading to today. It's been a great pleasure to be involved. I'd also like to thank my colleagues in Group 3 who contributed their expertise and experience to what I believe to be a comprehensive treatment of the issues of inclusive international mobility of people and knowledge. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Ms. Ginisha DEWANI, who will present the policy and institutional recommendations in the spotlight areas of Chapter 3. So first, let me provide an introduction and a definition of inclusion in internationalization, a sense of the status quo of internationalization inclusion for regional and national contexts, as well as that of higher education institutions and their students. And over the last 50 years, we've seen perhaps the greatest expansion of participation in higher education across Asia and Europe. While this massification of higher education has resulted in access to university level education for millions more, the question of inclusion alongside that of access has persisted for many groups within Asian and European societies. And while the number of students who study abroad has more than doubled over the last 20 years, the past 18 months aside, the prevailing norm of exclusivity rather than inclusivity of such internationalized university experience is evident. Previous research on participation patterns in short-term credit mobility shows us that the international education opportunities are predominantly taken by students from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Therefore, some international higher education activities are unwittingly broadening inequalities between different groups of students. On top of this, the disruption and fragmentation that COVID-19 has wrought on education systems globally has raised the possibility of new inequalities emerging as new digital modalities of delivery come to the fore. So as a group, we contend the likelihood of international higher education mobility and the wider internationalization of higher education agenda, the likelihood of that returning to a pre-2020 approach is improbable. At the same time, the call to make international higher education activities more inclusive becomes ever more forceful. We therefore stand at a critical inflection point in the context of international education, international higher education. And this allows us to examine the status quo and highlight the need for a more inclusive approach to the international mobility of people and knowledge in Asia and Europe. So our colleagues in Expert Group 3, Irina Ferenc, Director of the Academic Cooperation Association in Brussels, with John Delap, has proposed this definition of inclusive internationalization. And we've considered this as a guide for our research in this report. In preparing Chapter 3, it was important for us to understand the status quo of inclusion in internationalization, and that's across the multiple and diverse contexts of Asia and Europe. And we approach this along 3 levels: the regional higher education context, the national higher education context, and the context of higher education institutions and their students, their international students also. So looking at the regional higher education context first, we had a lot to consider and unpack. When we consider Asia is the largest and most populous continent on Earth, it's very difficult to draw generalized conclusions. As internationalization and inclusion are systemic approaches to education development, it's valuable to determine a locus of activity in any given geography, and indeed multiple geographies within the region. And we found this in the 10 member states comprising the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And this has become a nexus of the most cohesive regional policy development on internationalization and inclusion in Asia. The Bangkok Declaration on Advancing Partnership in Education for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in ASEAN was adopted by ASEAN heads of state at their 35th summit in Bangkok in November 2019. The declaration emphasized the crucial role of inclusive, equitable, and quality education, as well as the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all, and stressed the strategic value of partnership by bringing together national governments, international communities, civil society, the private sector, and other actors. And in the wider Asian region, China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, Austria, and New Zealand have ratified the Asia-Pacific Regional Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications in Higher Education. Better known as the Tokyo Convention, this came into force on the 1st of February 2018. And this is a mechanism for inclusion in internationalization. In Europe, the focus on increasing participation rates and widening access to higher education has been a constant policy and action concern for the last few decades. However, the focus in the internationalization of higher education is a more recent concern. The recently launched new generation of the Erasmus Plus program, 2021 to 2027, has inclusion as one of its cross-cutting priorities. And this extends across all fields and levels of education, from student and staff mobility, physical and blended, to joint program development, and different forms of partnerships and international collaboration. The most comprehensive current policy guidance for Erasmus Plus program countries even, is provided by Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps Inclusion and Diversity Strategy. And this put forwards a shared understanding of target groups, namely people with fewer opportunities, and foresees an increase in commitment, defines roles, and lists support organizations for advancing the inclusion work in this context. Moving on to the national higher education context of inclusion. We looked first at some of the key initiatives being pursued by Asian and European national systems. India's new education policy, approved in August 2020, sets out a 20-year blueprint to nearly double its higher education capacity and sets out a strategy of making quality higher education opportunities available to all individuals and ensuring equitable access to quality education for all students. In 2018, China simultaneously became the world's largest source of foreign students and the largest destination for studying abroad in Asia. 2019 saw the launch of China's Education Modernization 2035 plan. And this proposed a strategy of creating a new pattern of education opening up. This heralded a new form of internationalization of Chinese higher education with a greater emphasis on quality and competitiveness. Goal 9 of the Australian National Strategy for International Education 2025 states that Australia will embrace opportunities to grow international education by being more innovative, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of students and employers. Good examples of national level strategies in the European context come from Austria, Croatia, and Ireland, as well as from the Flemish community of Belgium's Support Centre for Inclusive Higher Education. This acts as a liaison office, supporting the development and implementation of equity measures for inclusive higher education. Austria's national strategy on the social dimension of higher education towards a more inclusive access and wider participation takes stock of measures already in place to support students from underrepresented groups and groups with specific needs, and outlines target areas and quantitative goals for the period up to 2025. Similarly, the Irish National Plan for Equity of Access to Higher Education, 2015 to 2021, and the Croatian National Plan for the Enhancement of the Social Dimension of Higher Education, 2019 to 2021, set key goals, priorities, and actions in specific national contexts. So moving on to the context of higher education organizations and institutions and students, there was a diversity of contexts and missions across both regions in evidence. In Asia, a number of notable alliances and networks have been established. Covering the broader geography and context of higher education in Southeast Asia is SEMIO, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization. Within this structure is SEMIO RIHED, the Regional Center for Higher Education and Development. And CMEO RIHEAD's main objectives are fostering access, excellence, and synergies in higher education, aiming to contribute to the development of the region. One of the newest of these groups is the Asian University Alliance, which was formed in April 2017 with 15 founding member institutions from across Asia. The AUA also affirms its commitment to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically in the areas of quality education and lifelong learning. Home to one of the youngest populations in the world, Southeast Asia's youth are increasingly engaged in the regional conversation on the future of the region. And one such platform is the ASEAN Youth Organization, which is an active contributor to the regional policy forums on ASEAN, higher education integration, youth employment, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. In Europe, the evolving inclusion-enhancing practices of individual HEIs have been complemented by the new European Universities Alliances. These are EU-funded strategic collaborations of HEIs that aim to develop and test new innovative approaches to teaching and learning, with a view to generating groundbreaking transformations. One such collaboration is the Young Universities for the Future of Europe Alliance. This brings together 12 HEIs and 4 associates. It aims to bring radical change and become the leading model of a young, student-centered, non-elitist, open and inclusive European university. The Aurora European University centers its vision on the principle of matching academic excellence with societal relevance, countering the popular assumption that academic excellence equals exclusivity. The NLIGHT network seeks to develop a structural and technical framework for inclusive, seamless, and green mobility, and provide the tools for flexible learning. The long-established European student representative organizations, such as the Erasmus Student Network and the European Student Union, have been particularly vocal and effective in advancing the inclusion agenda. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Ginisha DEWANI, who will share the spotlight areas for the chapter on inclusive international mobility of people and knowledge and their associated recommendations for policymakers and institutional stakeholders. Over to you, Ginisha.
Thank you so much, Darren. And thanks to the organizers and our ASF team as well, and our colleagues who have worked with us for the past 9 to 10 months, knitting all those recommendations all together in these reports. And a huge thanks to our moderators for today, who will be helping us to bring these recommendations on paper. So thank you so much, everyone. I will be starting by the spotlight area 1, which is international education, quality assurance, recognition, and inclusion. We have derived all the recommendations from the past background studies, the risks, the challenges, and the upcoming opportunities. And we, in a nutshell, drew some of the recommendations for policymakers as well as for the universities. So the first of the recommendation, which again states about the quality assurance and recognition and inclusion, we also, throughout the studies or the researches that we did, we realized that there is a lack of zone of trust between the representative of the universities or maybe the policymakers. So we thought to narrow it down, the concept of internationalization, by making a recommendation for the regional communities to connect, network, and build a zone of trust between each other to facilitate greater transparency, readability, reciprocity, and transfer of credentials to strengthen intra-regional cooperation, exchange, and student and staff mobility. For example, I would like to cite an example over here. So all these 3 areas are interconnected or interwoven with each other. If we talk about the zone of trust concept, it is closely linked with what the universities or the challenges faced by the students to realize the core concept of internationalization of the education. It again connects to the broader network of representatives from higher education. So the core crux of this concept or the recommendations for the policymaker is to build broader network of all the policymakers or the representatives to bring greater transparency and ensure the quality assurance and recognition in the education process. For Spotlight 2 area, we also have recommendations for universities. So dealing back into what we have studied or what we have reached or researched about the background of universities and studies about it. So since many of the universities do focus on mobility specifically, but there is a harsh or quick need for the universities to focus on the regional harmonization and bringing the regional networks all together to deliver a specific focused regional focused developments or mobility initiatives. Specifically, universities should also focus on bringing all the universities' expertise, focusing on student-oriented ideas and targets, and to bring more quality assured and recognized and inclusion initiatives for the students. Going ahead with Spotlight Area 2, which talks about digital transformation and international education. The digital transformation is what we have learned since our past many months because of the given pandemic situation, and we have been molding ourselves into more sort of virtual exchange programs. But this has been a very good example for creating more opportunities, but as well as has given more challenges for creating a balance for students from different backgrounds. To initiate that balance or to bring digital transformation in a healthier manner in maybe in the policy making system or the system which is working for higher education, it is much required that the policymakers should focus on creating a roadmap which focuses on interoperable systems of virtual exchange, which gives more connected virtual exchange and digital credentials for committed international education between Asia and Europe. Then we have recommendations for universities as well, is to bring a very balanced approach to bring all the community-oriented practices. For example, the Japan COIL, which is a digital blended learning practice, which has brought different, I would say, grassroots-oriented community practices on digital platform. So these kind of practices definitely are crucial for universities to stay connected and form the ideas which are being based on the universities from Asia and Europe. The Spotlight 3 area talks about the universal design for inclusion and internationalization. So the recommendations for specifically for policymakers, because we have been focusing more on very concrete or case-to-case based designs. However, we need to develop a very concrete or very complex, strong-based policy universal design for each and every student so that we can create a system where we highlight the need and the requirements of students and dedicate the targeted policy or outcome based on that. So that has been a crux or the core represent the recommendation for the policymakers is to identify, align, promote policies and good practices on inclusive mobility and exchange. The systematic or the system or the institutions should focus on practices and exchanging the relevant examples or the great practices of mobility being practiced in their own regions or countries to present more for the universities or the system in general. The recommendations that we dedicated for the universities are to create regional dialogues or maybe intra-regional or inter-institutional dialogues to ensure that we create a systematic, I would say a systematic approach towards bringing universal design for education. So focusing on student-oriented designs or maybe taking the student representatives or talking about the designs which have the student representation on the board. Also creating awareness about what actually inclusion stands. So the university should also engage in dialogues which create awareness about the concept of inclusion in general and how their practices, be the mobility practices or the policies, can be made more inclusive in general. One of my favorite spotlight areas is diversifying the learning process and again, making it more relevant to the students as well in the international education activities. So the major, backdrop or the background of this point is that since the universities or the system has been focusing on top-down approach in their education system while adapting different policies, So there is a need to adapt policies which arises from bottom-up approach. So focusing on the grassroots level or the local needs of the institutions is the important recommendation for policymakers, and also initiating or considering the not only making it subject-oriented conversation, but also making it more important for outcome-based education or transversal skills in internationalization. So for example, the education, as you see, the recommendation for universities also state for education for sustainable development. Should also focus on learning about the global issues or the global problems that the world is dealing with. So bringing in the skills which are not only subject oriented, but also bringing in the education or bringing in the knowledge skills for global issues or the other transversal skills at the end. Spotlight 5, which is, as a student, I think it is more important for everyone or each other student to learn more about the support services and how it can be made better, both by policymakers as well as the institutes. So the recommendation for policymakers is stating from what policy development can be made to support the students, starting from their pre-departure to their stay and then going after the stay or with their mobility in the different countries of Europe, or be it in Asia. So the policy development is basically focusing on the good practices that bring in the trust in the system, in the universities and the students to, again, which they feel more included in the universities in Asia and Europe. So that has been the recommendation for policymakers. And the recommendation for universities is to, again, explore more and more good practices or cases of internationalization support services from both Asia and European institutions. There has been different examples or instances where both the universities from different regions have worked really well to support students in terms of mitigating the barriers that they face while mobiling to different countries or shifting into different locations. So those cases can be traced and can be followed as instances of good practices. Thank you so much from my side and from Darren again, and to, again, the moderators. Thank you so much. I'll give the floor to Giorgio. Thank you so much.
Yes, so we're two here, so it's always a bit difficult. But let me start by thanking you for this excellent presentation. And we've seen there are a few questions already in the chat. And Giorgio will kickstart the debate by highlighting some of the questions and loop those back to you, Darren and Ginisha, and see if other questions will come up.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Hilligje. Thank you very much to Ginisha and Darren for a very interesting presentation. We received already some questions from the participants, and a lot of them are touching a similar issue on the transition from physical mobility to virtual mobility. And I might pose some of you because I think you can reply to them at the same time. For instance, one question from Dr. Doris Padmini, Selvarantam, and I beg your pardon for mispronouncing your name for sure, is asking how can international mobility programs be done online? Another one from Romero Bautista is asking again about sustainable strategies in conducting virtual mobility, especially in this time of the pandemic. And I think there is another one, but maybe, yeah, there is another one from Leilani de Guzman about how can exchange program can be done online. And another question is the same question is also asking if the need for travel is a prerequisite to create international linkages and technology transfer among higher education institutions. I think these three questions are more or less touching upon the same aspect, and therefore I think you can treat them as one.
Well, if I may start, yeah, I think it's what's on a lot of people's minds at the moment. And perhaps more last year, we all experienced that very uncomfortable phase when the pandemic was declared and institutions all over the world pivoted. With a little bit of time and I think research at institutional and also national level, there's been the opportunity to reflect on what works best and how best we can collaborate across borders and with our partner institutions. I would say the mistake that we have seen is trying to move what would be a physical education modality and map it directly onto a virtual education modality. It doesn't quite work. Virtual offers us many opportunities to do things differently and to approach things such as a flipped classroom or more asynchronous approaches to education in a more effective way. I'd like to, I suppose, make the distinction between virtual mobility and virtual exchange. And I think virtual mobility is, well, a little bit of a contradiction in terms because there isn't actually that physical movement. What is sustainable, I think, is creating exchange between students and particularly in an internationalized context between students within regions and between regions. And that is likely to be something that outlives the pandemic and something that remains a feature of higher education when physical mobility returns, because it has an awful lot of applications in terms of pre-departure and also post-return of international education programs. So I do believe that virtual exchange, coupled with approaches to collaborative online international learning, as we have seen in previous sessions today, provide excellent opportunities for institutions not only to develop partnerships, but to sustain partnerships and provide an internationalized education for their students, very much in the mold of internationalization at home.
Sorry, would you like to add something to this, Ginisha, or can we move to the next question?
Definitely, I believe it's being answered well by Darren, and I just want to differentiate between these two, that there is mobility of people and there is mobility of education. So it's very important that we have a blended learning program or hybrid learning programs running despite of this pandemic. So it should be in the system developed like for the whole years or the upcoming years, despite of the pandemic, as I said. So there is a difference. And again, you know, the quality assurance is very important while you are moving to a different country or you are learning online. So it's very important to maintain a balance between these two. The quality of education matters at the end.
Can I just follow up on an excellent point by Ginisha, in the sense that while people may not be mobile, that doesn't mean to say that knowledge can't be mobile and that it can't be that transfer. So to your point at the beginning as well, Hilligje.
Yeah, I think it's knowledge and even a point that you also stressed in your presentation, it's knowledge and understanding. So it's an opportunity to actually provide for many more people to access those dimensions of the education system. I would like to underline here that the IAU has been carrying out global surveys on the internationalization of higher education already since 2004, I think was the first time. And due to the pandemic, things have changed so much that it will be very exciting to launch the next global survey on the transformation of the internationalization dynamics post-pandemic. And there it will be interesting to work together with you as well, in line with the work that you've been doing. And that should be launched in 2022 for a presentation in 23, something like that, to be realistic in terms of data gathering and the like. But what we see in those points you've raised in your report and also now in the discussion is this need to really look at quality and thus to not copycat what we did in presential online, but rather to go to innovation and to really look at different modes of delivery in order for the capacity of internationalization or not internationalization, but the opportunities offered by internationalization to be maximized through these online and virtual opportunities for the many. I think this touches on a question that was raised by our colleague Halifa Idris on inclusion of students with disabilities in mobility programs. So there you have the dimensions that already have been addressed, or not addressed, but discussed a lot in terms of physical mobility. But maybe the virtual opportunities would need to be explored even better to indeed include students with disabilities better. Is there any question about that, or any information about that in the report or in the project that you've been developing on disabilities in particular?
I think we looked at the approach to all, I suppose, sections of society that may have a difficulty for one reason or another accessing opportunities of internationalization. That's not to say that they have been approached as one group, but of course there are the many intersectional approaches to that. I think in the report itself, there is a very good aspect or spotlight on internationalization support services between Asian and European institutions, and the importance of institutions adjusting their services and their student support services to support all students and to be available to all students, and not looking at international students as just being one particular subset of society. I think essentially, you know, to the point on digital components or digital modalities, the majority of students are non-mobile. So again, that approach to an internationalization of the curriculum, an internationalization of perhaps all aspects of higher education, given that it mirrors the experience in the working world. The majority of people these days are working across borders in one way or another. So it's important for a university to prepare people for that kind of experience.
Definitely, and then this morning in discussing the preparation for the session with Giorgio, we also recalled the fact that actually there's only 2% of the student population that is mobile globally. You had on this one of the first slides this notion of massification that impacted also on the increased number of mobile students, but it's only proportionate. So it's still only 2%. Even though there are more people mobile, this is more a result of the massification than of the diversification of the population, as you also showed on your slide. And thus the virtual dimension of things is important, as it does not only benefit the student individually, it benefits the institution and it benefits society at large, because the students bring this home, they bring this to their student groups, they bring it to their neighborhood. So in whichever form, internationalization should be part and parcel of any dynamics in higher education, or in education for that matter. We can move to the next question that we have in the chat by Justas Paulikas. And there again, I must pronounce it totally wrong, but I try. And the question is about micro-credentials. And could micro-credentials help increase mobility? Should we have global standards on micro-credentials? The question is very timely, as from a European perspective, as earlier this morning, I took part in a quality framework debate hosted by the Council of Europe, and 60 quality framework artists, I would like to name them, the architects behind the quality frameworks dynamics, met up to 60 people from 43 countries, which was very impressive. And they're working on the adoption and adaptation of the Dublin descriptors, which form part of this quality framework dynamics within the European European higher education area, and how to look at harmonization while also keeping all the values of diversity, obviously. But within that context, the issue of micro-credentials was also part and parcel of the debates. And it so happens that Jurashi and Michael Karpicek, who led Jurashi for long, has just issued a report on the issue of micro-credentialing. So it's interesting to see that on many different fronts, this is being discussed. Is this also part of the discussions or the report, or can you highlight maybe where that resonates with your work?
I'll take that if you like. I mean, Spotlight 2 deals with digital transformation of international education. So we would see micro-credentials being a subset of that, but I would also see it as a subset of the wider discussion on digital credentials. And this has seen certainly significant development in Europe through the Europass framework and the European digital credentials infrastructure that has been put in place over the last while. There are a number of initiatives worldwide leading on this in different regions. Here in Singapore, there are a number of initiatives being pursued by the government. The government arm is called GovTech. Also in Japan, there's the REXI initiative, which the Groningen Declaration Network is heavily involved in as well. It's a real, I suppose, feature of public-private cooperation, government and the private sector coming together to provide this. But I think ultimately what it does is give more control of qualifications and the portability of qualifications to students. So they can hold their qualifications in their digital wallet and they can pass them to employers and for further study. So this is a democratization. It makes things more fluid. It makes things more assured because these systems are backed often by blockchain, which is a very good system for ensuring or verifying for want of a better word, the veracity of the qualifications. So there's no longer a need to go through a time-consuming process of having a separate organization verify these. So I see them as something, a collaborator, and definitely something that will ease international education and the mobility of people, and again, knowledge across borders.
Thank you for that. Very important points raised there as well. And so it's interesting to see how that will also involve many other players into the education pathway. So indeed, but with blockchain, you'd better not lose your codes, because then you're stuck. That's interesting as well. But I don't see other questions in the chat. But maybe after having read chapter 3, Giorgio,
there is just one arriving.
Okay, very
exactly good. In this moment, as we were saying that there were no more questions, just one arrived. And this is something connected. Is a question specifically to Asia. It's a question from Arwin Natividad. And Arwin is asking if there is a specific approach or a specific strategy which could be adopted in developing countries in Asia. So if there is a kind of specificity for developing countries comparing to already industrialized countries.
Go ahead, Ginisha, please.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm actually not sure in which context or which point this question is to, but I would like to highlight, because being from Asian country, I'm an Asian country, I would like to highlight that Asian countries are often dealing with what is called as digital divide, which what we have highlighted in our report as well. So there is a need to build that digital divide, which means that having proper access to resources, quality assurance of education in universities is very important. So making sure that even when a single student is wanting to attend a lecture, he has specific Wi-Fi connectivity or has good equipments to use that. So, clarifying on that, so working on digital divide is more important in Asian countries. Another one is to deal with the language barrier, which is the linguistic barrier, I would say, which most of the Asian countries do face while moving outside the Asian countries for education, higher education specifically. So the universities and the system can definitely work in collaboration with European universities or maybe regional networks to support better work on language or maybe running courses before joining the online courses. So that is one. And I think the third, which is more relevant to developing countries, be it from Asia or Europe, which is very important, is to focus on more awareness about the concept of inclusion. And the other important is the awareness about the concept of differences, because we often talk about the concept of inclusion, but we never talk about what are the existing differences. So talking about the actual problems or the issues that maybe it might be related to disability, it might be related to finances, it might be related to the support services. So talking more about the differences and then coping with the good practices or with the combined practices by both the regions could help the students for a longer run. These were the 3 points. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ginisha. Darren, would you like to add something on this topic, or should we move to another one?
Yeah, I think there are a number of initiatives underway, and I think developing countries, are not particular to Asia. So we have developing countries worldwide, and significant initiatives by neighbors and I think other countries to work across the international education sector. There's much to be learned. I think the category, putting countries into categories and saying, well, this is a developing country and this is a developed country, doesn't really have a place in international education to the same extent, because there's always something to be learned. And there's a great deal of value in engaging countries, no matter where they are, and developing pathways and education programs. The SHARE program that I am working on is engaged in a number of initiatives, and of course there's a great difference in approaches to higher education, and maybe differences in capacity in higher education in the ASEAN region, but we are still able to collaborate and work on the same initiatives. So it's not necessarily a case that we all move at the same pace, but the will is there, and there's great progression, and there has been huge development in the SHARE program in various areas of qualifications frameworks, quality assurance. We're also looking at virtual exchange, collaborative online international learning, and digital credentials in all ASEAN member states at the moment. So yeah, we see great learning from each other, no matter where we're coming from.
Thank you very much, Darren. Maybe a very last question that we receive very quickly, and I think maybe Ginisha, you are the most appropriate person to reply to this question. I will not read exactly the question because it's quite long, but the core of the question is access of information to students. And I mean, the opportunities are out there, but sometimes for students it's difficult to access, also because the university is not channeling that information to the students. What kind of advice do you have for students to access information of all the opportunities that are out there?
That's a really good question as a student also, and answering this question, I might be not the right person, but I'll definitely look, try to answer this question. So in my belief, being a student, I believe that the university should have student representatives stationed in university campus to support the students who are coming or joining the university for short or longer term courses. So maybe the student representatives can be connected to the staff or the leadership or the management of the university. So that is one more important point. So the university representatives can really help the students to get in touch with the specific teacher or with the department or with the sector that they need help for. And the second point, which I personally love doing that, is networking. So as a student, keep networking, keep interacting with people. Though, the digital transformation has limited the social proximity a bit. But again, keep exploring, keep utilizing all those social media channels or maybe the professional platforms that are there. Professional like this, right, we are here. So utilize these opportunities more, try and connect to, talk to people and find out the websites or the opportunities or the link that can lead to the universities or the different big organizations. That is another helpful suggestion from my side. And the third is, again, keep browsing more and more opportunities and also for help, because there are many organizations like ASEP and the one organization with Darren associated with. They are working continuously to support the people or students working in higher education. So seek out for more help and advice from them.
Wonderful. Conscious of time, I see that the discussions could go into many new directions. We have to stop our session here. I think this is a very good appetizer for everyone to now go read the report. Maybe that the presentation will also be shared. It's now very good to also go from recommendation to practice. On the students, we may add that there is very recently we could see the creation of a global student association, and that is something that people can Google and there as well, as Ginisha suggested, connect and make sure that you are connected around the world that way. I give the floor back to you, Miguel Pangalangan, because you can close this session and we can get to the next one. Thank you.
Hilligje, Giorgio, Darren, and Ginisha, thank you very much for this this great session. Lots of food for thought. We will have a 5-minute health break. Again, for our ASEM policymakers who are with us on the conference platform, do go to your agenda section and choose and move to the closed door session on chapter 3. And so you can join the closed door session on chapter 3. For our public audience, you're invited to the next session of the ARC8 conference, which will focus on chapter 4 of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030, which focuses on inclusive and flexible lifelong learning pathways. If you are on the conference platform, please visit the agenda section and select the session for chapter 4. If you are on YouTube, simply stay tuned to the YouTube live stream. And once more, for the participants who want to receive a certificate of attendance, the letter for this session, the session's ARC8 anagram game is the letter D. D for Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. Thank you again for your time.